Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone, a podcast that is prototypically dedicated to conversation about the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. But you may have noticed, either by the title of this episode or by any number of places you may have found this episode, that this is indeed not about Thomas Pynchon. That instead, this happens to be the first episode, sort of proper, in our series on Infinite Jest. For those who may not understand why this is in the feed, in order to break up the monotony, I suppose would be the correct word here, of us discussing the same book for, nearly 3 years, we, meaning myself and Cody, are gathering together to discuss Infinite Jest in a similar way that we do Thomas Pynchon's works, but with a less... Our show kind of, it started out as not trying to be exhaustive, but has sort of developed its way into something more approximating an exhaustive sort of report on his books. So that is what we're going to be doing, not just for this month, but for the following 10 months as we sort of celebrate Infinite Jest's 30th birthday by discussing this sort of masterwork of not quite postmodern literature, but post-postmodern literature.
Reading one book for 3 years was too much, so we're going to do one more for a whole year.
Yeah, 2 books a year. That seems like a fairly solid setup.
Pacing.
Just to kind of give the listener an idea of how this show is going to be laid out. These episodes are not going to be 4 hours in length. Maybe 1 or 2 of them will if we find that there's something like really to dig into for quite a long time. But instead, this is going to sort of give us an opportunity to, with each of the 100-page sections that I've broken the book up into, talk about kind of a broad recap of the section that we read, talking about plot developments, thematic developments, and then sort of some of the similar stuff that we do in the Pynchon episodes of our favorite quotes, maybe our favorite elements of humor. Wallace and Pynchon are pretty similar in the sense that their books are in part equally serious and equally silly. And sort of prompting just a more general discussion of the pages that we read, because of the fact that we are covering so much relative length, especially compared to the Pynchon episodes. These conversations sort of have to end up being a bit more generalized. So, without further ado, the first section that we are reading, and for anyone who has any sort of concerns about pagination or additions, to the best of both myself and Cody's ability, all of them are the same. There are some editions of the book that are, I'm going to use this term very loosely, pocket-sized, that are reduced in footprint that may have different editions, but generally, by and large, all the American editions, all of the kind of standard size UK editions seem to have the same pagination. So for this first section, we have read through page 1 to 105, and there's a page break on 105, a little bit, less than a third of the way down the page that we stopped at. What do you think of these opening chapters to Infinite Jest? Because obviously, reading these as someone who is experiencing the book for the first time is a sort of like atom bomb level, significantly different experience than going back to them on the second time. Because Wallace's internal world is so consistent from the beginning of the book to the end that all of the different references that he makes to elements of his world building or elements of his sort of near history mean nothing to you until you get to like page 300, which is of course not the case coming back through. So as someone who recently read it for the first time and is now going back through the book again, what was your experience like revisiting this book and this opening chunk of pages?
It's a lot easier to, I hate to say it's a lot easier to get through, but it's a lot easier to get through.
Yeah.
is the first time I read it, it was sort of an abandoned project. I got about 100, maybe a little bit less than 100 pages in. I think I got about. I'm trying to remember. I think I messaged you about it at the time. I think I got to where Kate Gompert was in the hospital and she was having her interaction with the doctor, and that
Maybe it's
had
in the
at that
70s.
time, yeah, 70s, 80s, somewhere around there. And at the time, it was just a little bit too much for me emotionally to deal with. And on top of that, it just felt like a Herculean effort to continue going. It just felt like there was so much being dropped on you at once.
Yeah.
And there kind of is. And that's, I think, intentionally done. And it is, I think, a part of what makes the book seem so daunting outside of its actual size. I think that once I allowed myself to just really roll with it and approached it like I do with pretty much everything else I read, especially with like Penchon, where the first reading is always just a let everything wash over me, just go for the ride, see what happens. And if it's something I want to come back to, I'll come back to it. Obviously, that's what happened here. So going through it a second time and kind of understanding where things go, where the trajectory of the story's plot takes us, really adds an interesting layer to a second reading. And I would imagine it builds on that with each subsequent reading as well, as you can start sort of picking out the elements in the narrative thread that come into play, and when they come into play, and where there's foreshadowing, and where certain characters are revealed for the first time. There's a lot going on that finally starts to click more in place in these early pages after having read it. So for anyone reading it for the first time, if you're not 100% sold on it just yet, like Kate said, it takes to about page 300 to really grab you for the first time. And once it does, it will 100% consume you. So stick with it and just go for the ride. And I promise, once you get to the end, you're going to want to go back and go through that whole journey again.
Yeah, you will become an element of annular fusion.
Yeah.
The important thing to understand with this as well is that this is significantly intentional. As we get into the sort of broader themes of the book, especially as we go on, and even in the beginning sort of chunks here, you'll find that processes which repeat themselves, whether it be drug addiction, the entertainment itself, familial trauma, intergenerational trauma, entertainment addiction, all of these things, and then of course like annular fusion, what himself invents. All of these things are processes by which the same loop repeats over and over and over. And in that, the book itself is a loop as well. So with it opening in the year of Glad, you have no idea when you're experiencing this book for the first time, but that is the sort of furthest year of subsidized time that you will experience from a chronological perspective. If you were to read this book in chronological order, you would read the opening 15 pages last. You don't know that yet until you're given a calendar of how the years turned over from the standard kind of 1991, 1992, 1993, that sequential series of numbers, to this idea of subsidized time, which we'll get into later when that comes up in the book. This was part of the composition of the book for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, the sort of greater themes of cycles that repeat themselves, be they harmful or helpful. But also, David Foster Wallace wanted to accomplish two things with the structure of his book. The first, as he will talk about in an interview with Michael Silverblatt that you can listen to, he wanted to structure the book like a Sierpinski gasket, which is a type of fractal where it is a big triangle that then divides into 3 triangles, that divides into 9 triangles, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. From my understanding of the composition of the book itself, the sort of Sierpinski specific structure only lasted through the first draft that we have not ever had access to. The 1,600 page, plus however many pages of notes and errata that would run after those 1,600 pages that were edited down. What remains is still a fractal-like structure, but not one that is as specifically engineered, as I understand it, as the original. And instead, what you have, which you can again hear him talk about in this interview with Michael Silverblatt, is a structure that is designed to mirror the difficulty of trying to figure out what is going on in an adult life after the millennium or on the cusp of the millennium in the United States. And Wallace saw that there was something increasingly difficult with the advent of the internet, with the expansion of television and media consumption, and with the general sort of opening up of the frontier for people to do kind of whatever they wanted after college in a way that hadn't existed prior, that made it uniquely difficult to live as an adult human being in search of something truly meaningful. And so in looking to mirror that experience of how do I decide what to do after high school? How do I decide what is important to hold on to? How should I spend my time? What should I focus on? He wanted the book to provide a similar challenge. So as you go through it for the first time, a lot of these things, as we've already mentioned, don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. What is the year of dairy products from the American heartland versus the year of the Whopper? Who is Kate Gompert? Who is, Mario Incandenza? What is this school? Why are these two people meeting on top of a hilltop? All of these things are purposely there for you to ask those questions. And the idea is that if you push forward and you persevere to the other side of that, you are rewarded for that struggle with the answers, and you're rewarded with an experience. In the same way that, in theory, if you take that struggle upon yourself in real life, there should be some sort of a reward or some sort of fulfillment that comes from the process of undertaking that challenge or that struggle. So, as Cody said, if you're finding it challenging, stick with it. It is purposeful, and it's designed to not only make you ask questions about the text, but also somewhat about your own life that you have been living. It's pretty hard to come through this book having it talk about all of the themes that it does and not kind of have some internal questions about the choices that you've made or the kind of person that you've become.
The other thing I would say that I think I wanted to mention this during our intro episode, and it just completely slipped my mind until I was finishing up this section of the reading today. This book has a sort of unfair reputation as being this sort of bro-lit kind of thing, where it's just people just read it because it's a big important book kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is genuinely a phenomenally written book, and it is hilarious. There are scenes that take place. There are parts, just general throw jokes that are in here. I often read books that are funny, but I don't often laugh out loud while I am reading. But this is one of those books that has had me laughing out loud at certain parts because it is so absurdly funny. So don't let its reputation kind of get in the way of what is actually within this book.
Yeah, agreed completely. And despite its length, this is something that Dave Eggers comments on in his introduction to the 10th anniversary paperback, which used to be kind of the standard introduction until the 20th anniversary paperback came out. And Tom Bissell's introduction kind of took over for most of the standard paperback editions you're going to find in stores. Although maybe now it's going to be the 30th anniversary edition that you see hanging around with Michelle Zauner's introduction. But he comments on this in the intro that while it is a big sort of challenging book in terms of its length, in terms of its structure, and in terms of sort of the seriousness of its thematic content, it is not necessarily a difficult book to read. That while Wallace was clearly an incredibly smart man and was, as he would maybe put it, obscenely overeducated, he was able to condense his ideas in a way and in a language that I would say most people are capable of grasping. yes, there are big kind of $10 words that he uses, often, but it is never divorced from context where you can't figure out what he's talking about. And it's never a linchpin of a sentence or a page or a scene in which if you don't understand what that word exactly means definitionally, then you're not going to be able to grasp what's going on. He's considered the master of transposing a phrase like "and but so" into fiction, which is something that kind of ordinary daily people would say in communication with each other, but that wouldn't have naturally been put into novels and kind of until he was writing, because it was considered bad. It was considered bad writing. It was considered bad grammar. But he really strove in a lot of ways to really write down what it's like to be present in a actual conversation with another human being. And that's why I think a lot of the dialogue in his books and the description of scenes as they happen feels additionally real to me in terms of being able to visualize it or kind of hear the rhythm of it. Because in a lot of cases, it does just sound like how people think or talk, which is one of his greatest sort of strengths as a writer.
Yeah. I think that's evident pretty early on in the book.
Yeah.
Especially like the section towards the end of what we read where the boys at the academy are all kind of sitting around after
Yes.
working all day and just talking about how tired they are and the different ways in which they feel tired. Yeah, it like for a book published in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, even well before then, that would have been a huge, oh, you can't write like that. That's not how people in books talk. It might be how real people talk. It's not how people in books talk.
Yeah.
So it's very refreshing to have that that sort of dialogue appear in here, and it lends a lot more realism to what's going on, even in times where things seem quite absurd.
So outside of sort of re-experiencing the beginning of the book again, after such a recent first experience with it, what's your impression of these chapters? How was your experience overall? What did you think of this chunk?
It's still not my favorite part of the book.
Sure.
That's not any denigration towards it. It's still a fantastically written part of the book, and it's doing what it needs to do. And understanding that, like I had mentioned earlier, and like you talked about a little more in depth with its the circularity that exists within the novel's plot, it makes a lot more sense, and so I'm able to enjoy it a little bit more as a result of that.
Yeah.
Because I understand its scene setting, and it's really just kind of, putting plates on the table, putting the silverware on the table, the food's on its way. We're gonna have a good meal here in a little bit, but right now we have to, make this presentation so that we know what's going on and what to expect. And it really sets the tone for a lot of things. There's some great scenes in here. There's some parts that I really enjoy that are some of my favorite parts of the book. But as a whole, this general section, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So scene setting is I think an apt phrase, because this is a book that has multiple plot lines to it that all converge and intertwine with one another. In the same way that there's a Monty Python sketch about summarizing Proust.
One of my favorite ones, yeah.
It's an excellent one, especially as someone who's now reading Proust at a rate of 1 volume per year.
Yeah.
That sketch gets funnier the further into Proust I actually get as I read. Especially because in theory you could summarize it really easily. This is completely off topic, but there is a podcast that I listen to that I've mentioned a couple times in our main program called Backlisted, and they did a episode on Proust. And they, after referencing that Monty Python sketch, they posed it to all of the sort of hosts that were on the panel that time of how they would summarize Proust. And one of them says, Marcel becomes a writer. And then someone else quibbled with that that summary and said, Marcel begins to become a writer. And that is certainly one of the central preoccupations of the novel. But in a similar way to summarizing Proust, there is a challenge in how you would describe what this book is about to somebody. Do you want to give it a go, Cody? If someone asked you what Infinite Jest was about.
It's funny
What
that
would
you
you
asked
say?
me this because my son literally asked me this question this morning when I was sitting on the
Great.
couch reading. He came by. He's like, "What?" He jokingly was like pointing to parts of the page, like, "What is this? What is this? What is this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's somebody sick." And he was like, "Well, what's really happening in there?" So I was like, "Well, in a nutshell, in a very big nutshell, it is the story of if we're limiting it, are we limiting it to just this section that we read, or like in general, the
No,
book?"
in general, because from here I'm just
Okay,
gonna kind of give an overview of what the different sort of plot points are.
gotcha. So, it is a story about a group of boys at a tennis academy. One of whom is sort of the main character, Helen Condenza. He is a um a young man who is struggling with the academy that he's in. It's a very academically demanding program he's in, but it's also very athletically demanding. Um, he has lost his father recently. He has these two brothers who are in different ways connected to him and live very different lives, but live with him as a result of that. His friends that are involved in there's a secret society of wheelchair bound Frenchmen who run a spy organization that
Excuse me,
uh,
Quebecois.
Quebecois, sorry. That will piss some people off, and I am sorry. And a cross-dressing, is Marath CIA or FBI? Or not
He's
Marath,
Department of Unspecified
Unspecified
Services.
Services, that's what it is, yes. Thank you. So you have those two. You have Don Gately, a former addict. Well, not former. I mean, everybody's always an addict. Once you're an addict, you're an addict. An
Mhm.
addict who was also a burglar who is trying to sober up and get his life straightened out. You have Kate Gompert, a young woman who is dealing with severe depression and anxiety and trying to find a way to live a meaningful life. And if she can't, just a way to get out of her life. And a litany of other characters who I could go on and on about that tie into all of these people.
Yeah.
But these are sort of the main players of the game that we're all kind of introduced to here at the beginning. And it's unclear at this part of the novel how all of these people are interconnected, but that will become apparent as the story goes on. This
Yeah.
book also takes place in the future, in which um, commercialization and capitalism have become so grossly rampant that we have started naming years based on the company who wants to sponsor it or subsidize it. So everything, like Kate was saying at the beginning, the early 90s and beyond or before, that's all what's called before subsidization or standard subsidization. Everything after is like the year of the Whopper, the year of the Depends adult undergarment. Things like, so basically whatever company bought that year gets to have that year, and that's how time is identified. Entertainment has taken the form of these cartridges that are played that people um, can order online on a sort of well, it's not a pseudo internet, it is the internet. They can download them, but they also exist as a physical media that you can have and play. So there's an obsession with film and with entertainment and visual entertainment specifically that runs constant through here that also feeds into these cycles of addiction. Um, and it, it's that's a lot of it, but it's
Yeah.
also none of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a wild scattershot thing on the surface, but once you start to get further and further into it, you see how all of these seemingly unconnected pieces are really and truly connected to each other, and how they affect each other, and how one has fed into the other that feeds into another that feeds into another.
Yeah. In the past, when asked to explain what this book is about to somebody, because of course, as soon as people kind of learn that you're a reader, they always go, "What's your favorite book?" And then for
And then if
most,
you tell them it's Infinite Jest, yeah.
yeah, which unfortunately is my answer to that question,
Yeah.
and engenders mostly responses of "What's that about?" Um, and in some cases, just sort of groans. But in response to people who've asked me what it's about, I have often defaulted to an answer of it is about a film that is so entertaining that it has the capability of paralyzing you and forcing you to watch it on a loop until you die, presumably of dehydration. And it is about the man and the family of the man who made that film and the various organizations seeking to gain control of it for use of their own ends is the best that I have been able to come up with in terms of describing what this book is about in just sort of like one or two sentences.
That's a much more succinct way of describing. Yes.
And there's a couple of different ways that Wallace does this, and in a couple of different ways, what I mean is a couple of different sort of general plot threads that run through the book, which is sort of what Cody was starting to get into there. One is with the sort of protagonist of Hal and Cantenza and his family, who both run and live in the Enfield Tennis Academy, which is, as Cody mentioned, both a highly challenging school academically, but then also athletically. It is designed sort of as a preparatory environment for teenagers who have a chance at becoming professional tennis players. That's one thread that runs through, and how that family, which runs Enfield Tennis Academy, the patriarch of that family, who has recently died, is responsible for creating the lethally entertaining film. You have the storyline involving the Ennet House recovery and drug addiction alcohol recovery house, if I remember correctly, is the full name of it.
Yeah, I think
so. Where the cast involved in all of the sort of Ennet House sequences are all either addicts or depressives or both. It is about their life and how they ended up as addicts and what they are doing to try and recover from those various addictions or sort of mood disorders or depressions that they experience. And then you have the sort of political angle, which is of these two men that Cody mentioned, Morath and Steepley, but also a sort of intercontinental, or it's not really intercontinental anymore. This sort of like inter-district fighting between Canada and the United States, principally sort of Quebec and the United States, and how there are separatist movements seeking to dissolve the newly unified Central and North American continents. That is sort of what everything is going to revolve around as we go forward into the book. Something is either going to be related to Ennet House, something's going to be related to the Academy and the Incandenzas, or is going to be related to this greater sort of political intrigue or infighting that's happening. And as Cody mentioned towards the end of his sort of summary, the pages that we read for this episode are all table setting individual characters that belong in one of those settings, or introducing concepts that explain, a portion of the political system that's currently running, or the political environment that's currently existing. How Ennet House, how the members of Ennet House rather have ended up there, and then how the Academy runs, and what the Incandenza family is like. That is essentially what each of these individual scenes and chapters in that first 105 pages is all doing. So before we kind of dive in, is there anything else you want to mention, Cody, before we start going over the material kind of a little bit more in detail?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay. So we open up in the Year of Glad, where Hal Incandenza is being interviewed by the sort of Board of Admissions for Arizona University. We learn that he is about to graduate from high school at the Enfield Tennis Academy, and that there seems to be something strange with his transcripts. That he tests sort of in a superlative category in one area of his academic studies, and then in another, like completely like flatline test scores as far as what percentile it puts him in. And they're trying to ascertain what's going on with his transcript. And by the end of the scene, Hal has attempted to answer that question, but has completely lost control of both his speech and his sort of physical characteristics, in the sense that we don't really know how he sounds, but we know that he flails about a lot when he speaks, and when he does speak, it's unintelligible. After Hal, we are introduced to one of the future Ennet House residents who is waiting for someone to deliver him a absurd amount of marijuana. And he is sort of perseverating and anxiously going over all the different things that he is going to do with the marijuana and also not do. After that, we are treated to a conversation between Hal and his father, who is disguised as a conversational therapist. After that, we are treated to a conversation between Hal and his brother Mario, who is significantly deformed in some ways, but also is just one of the few characters in the book who is entirely earnest the entire time.
Yeah.
From there, we are introduced to the medical attaché who begins to watch the lethal entertainment. Then we are introduced to another Ennet House resident who will not come up until later. His name is Roy Toney. After that, we are introduced to Bruce Green, who is another Ennet House resident. We are treated to more talk between Hal and Mario. And then we are introduced to the oldest Incantenza brother, Oren, who is an NFL player who's currently living in Arizona, and all of his various anxieties. And then we are introduced not just to Hal in greater detail, clearly when he is a bit more put together, but we also learn that Hal is an avid user of marijuana in a sort of secretive way. He likes to use his one-hitter in the sort of crawl space of the tennis academy and blowing it into a large ventilation fan. After that, we are given an update on what the medical attaché is up to. The answer is sitting in his chair watching the movie still. Then we are introduced to Don Gately, and we learn about his brief history as a burglar and as a drug addict who is burglarizing those homes in order to get money for drugs, as Cody briefly mentioned in his recap. And then from there, we are introduced to a few more of the students at Enfield, then to the creation of Enfield itself and its founder, who will be referred to as himself by a lot of the characters in the book. And then we are given more details about Oren, specifically before a football game, some details about drugs. Then we get to the Kate Gompert chapter, who will come back around to be another resident of Ennet House. And then we eventually are introduced to Steepley and Marath, and so completes our different plot points, but not before we learn also about Gerald Stitt, one of the major figures at the Academy, as well as yet another Ennet House resident in Tiny Ewell. This sort of compromises everything that takes place in the first 105 pages as it relates to who all of these people are. There's not really a great sort of clean way to point out all of those connections without just going through and reading the book along with us. But if you're wondering why there's all these disparate POVs and where they are going to end up, that is where those characters are going to end up. Before we get into the thematic intent of each of these sections, what were some of your favorite portions? Not just maybe from a humor perspective, but from the writing perspective. Which of these scenes and chapters in the first 105 pages really stand out to you, and why?
The first one that comes to mind, and there's a lot of them. Like I said, some of these passages are among my favorite in the book. The scene where the unnamed gentleman was waiting for his delivery of marijuana is one of the most chillingly accurate representations of anxiety that I've gone through as well. That sense, the sense of like everything has to be in its right place and things have to go a very specific way, otherwise the whole thing's going to come falling apart. And while I'm not, I haven't done anything anywhere close to resembling any kind of drugs for years now. That idea of that that preparation for something that you really want, and the almost obsession that goes into it, to the point where it's no longer about the thing itself, it's about the process, um, is a huge, uh, part of my anxiety, at least, or it was. Medication has helped. Um, but that portrayal of it, and especially the way it ends, where he's literally stuck between the doorbell's ringing and the phone is ringing, and I don't know which one of these 2 to go to. It's kind of like if anyone has seen, one of Guy Ritchie's earlier films, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, there is a scene where at the very end, well, I don't wanna spoil it. There's a scene like that at the end of the movie. So, it reminded me a lot of that. Um, but it's also like it's not just the content that he's talking about and that whole process. It's the way it's written that
Yeah.
is doing a lot of the work as well, because it is specifically designed to be these like long-winded, rambling paragraphs that almost don't stop. And it's panic thinking. It's
Yep.
this rushing sense of this has to happen, and this has to happen, and this has to happen, and this has to happen. So it made for a very, upsetting read for me the first time, but a very good one, and it's a fantastic example of what this book is able to do and what Wallace was able to do as a writer. I also highlighted, I mean, there's a bunch in this early section, but, I know this morning I had highlighted, the scene where I think it's Primulus is talking to a group of kids about mushrooms in a
Yeah.
grotesquely scientific manner. And they're just bored as shit through the whole thing, but he's just so into his own little world about it. That was a fantastic scene. The Kate Gompert scene, like I mentioned at the beginning, that one was hard to read through the first time for me, but understanding it now, similar to the one I mentioned a moment ago, it his description of her depression and anxiety is extremely well done, and it's
Yeah.
not done in a um, overly, you know, pathetic sort of way of this. And she even says that as a character. She's like, my depression isn't this woe is me, look at me, pay attention to me kind of thing. It really hits a lot closer to home for me, for example, where my instances with depression have always been a sort of overwhelming sense of dread of something bad happening, but not being able to understand what that bad thing is, and then dwelling on the fact that you can't understand what that thing is and the fact that it's going to happen at the same time. Maddening. And he does such a good job of bringing that to life in a way that isn't putting it in a negative light. It's very humanizing the way he portrays her, and she is and will continue to be one of my favorite characters in the book. Um, and then the scene you mentioned earlier of James Incandenza, disguising himself as a language or speech pathologist or something like that, like plying Hal with sprites and trying to get information. Just like trying to have a father to son talk with this kid, but he can't do it as a father, so he has to invent a character to do it. Is hilarious. Yeah, I think those are the first ones that come off the top of my head. What about you? Did you have any? Has yours stayed the same with? I know you've read it several times, but is it the
Yeah.
same every time, or do you find new sections that you enjoy more?
It has changed a little bit. I would say that pretty much the scene where he's waiting for his weed dealer to show up has always remained an amazing scene to me, and one that really stands out. Not just for the stuff that you have already mentioned in how it perfectly sort of portrays panicked thinking and that anxiousness, of sort of awaiting a moment or of going through your head, going, in and over your head into the thoughts that you're having about something. This time through, I would say my appreciation for it deepened when I just looked at how the structure of it mirrors the ratcheting panic thoughts, not just from the perspective of um, how long the paragraphs get, but even just how long the sentences get,
Mhm.
and how certain punctuation drops out to give the reader less of a kind of mental break at either a comma or a period, and the way in which the speed with which his sort of frontal lobe moves from this thought to this thought to this thought to this thought increases as his kind of anxiety pitches up. So that has continued to be a pretty big scene for me. The Kate Gompert scene is also, as you had already mentioned, one of the greatest sort of depictions of what clinical depression feels like, and really what suicidal ideation is. Particularly their exchange on the phrase "hurt yourself" is one of those things where I feel like people who don't have much experience with clinical depression or with, any kind of critical thought about suicidal ideation would sort of necessarily think about, because of course from that perspective this does appear to be that you're looking to hurt yourself. So those two scenes pretty much have always stayed the same as far as of being of import. I would say the final scene with them all sitting around the locker room hit me as being particularly good this time around.
Yeah.
Which hasn't really happened to me in the past, I wouldn't say. But the way in which he's juggling so many different voices speaking to one another, and just the very realistic kind of feeling of being tired after a long day of physical activity, and you're just sort of laying in the shower or just kind of like sitting there with that exhaustion, that really stands out to me this time. And then I would say the other scene that significantly stood out to me in a way that hadn't prior would be the Gerhard Stitt conversation between him and Mario. I would say that scene in previous readings has always felt a bit of a throwaway to me. Not in the sense that like you could cut out of the book and it wouldn't matter, but in the sense that it was just there for table setting. When you really get into what the two of them are talking about in that scene, it is basically the thesis statement of the book, which I think that really just my focus was sharpened on in thinking about this book and how do I present this material sort of critically for an audience, right?
Right. Yeah.
So certainly the perspective with which I'm operating this time has changed my disposition towards some of it. But I would say that those four really stand out as my favorite moments.
Yeah. The scene of the boys in the locker room, that was the scene I read this morning that had me laughing out loud. Specifically, it was, and I guess I didn't clock this on my first reading, but the disparate viewpoints that they all have of like what their idea of relaxation is, where most of them are the typical teenage thing of, like smoking weed and sex and this and that. But then Struck is just obsessed with eating granola with a very large
just a
wooden
giant spoon.
Which is hilarious. And he's like so focused on that's all he's talking about. There's he has a line, one of those wooden spoons so big you can barely get your mouth around it.
You can barely fit your mouth around it.
It's like,
oh man,
I had to put the book down. I was almost crying.
Yeah, just it's 3 or 4 guys all talking about how badly they want to like fuck waitresses, and then, and then it's just, man, would it be
big bowl of granola?
Just eat granola, just dry granola with a huge, specifically wooden spoon. Oh man, yeah, that joke struck me particularly funnily this time around. So as we get into the themes of the book, this episode is probably going to be maybe the least interesting to listen to because of the fact that this is all literally all just setup. But there's a couple of big themes that he is beginning to set up in these 105 pages. The first and biggest one, which will not just be dominating this section, but the book, is this idea of processes that repeat themselves. How intergenerational trauma works, how drug addictions work, how addictions in general work, and how the decisions of those around us impact our own decision and the way in which we kind of view the world around us. That is the biggest thing that he is sharpening in this book. In sort of conjunction with that is this comparison between long-term happiness or satisfaction or achievement and what it takes to get that versus a short-term gratification or happiness or feeling of satisfaction and what is sacrificed in pursuit of that instant gratification, and then how forces outside of ourselves control to a certain extent the direction we go in between those two kind of polar opposites. And so it follows that this is sort of the most impactful themes in his table setting that he wants to start out with as early as he possibly can. Now, there are a number of theories about why Hal is the way that he is at the beginning of the book. I have a theory that I could lay out right now. I feel like that isn't exactly germane to the conversation for this first episode, but promise that I will loop around back to that as we go on. So, kind of starting from there, we begin, as I mentioned, with it's Ken Erdetti is who's waiting for his marijuana.
Yes. Okay.
We get into the first Ennet House resident with Ken Erdetti, and Ken Erdetti is very anxiously waiting for his weed, and he has this cycle that he engages in of saying he's going to quit, quitting for a little bit, ending up in a situation usually involving a woman, it seems, whereby he has access to marijuana again, and then he does this whole sort of self-humiliation ritual where he like smokes too much too quickly to force himself into a position where he says that he's done smoking forever. It's sort of his kind of particular psychosis. And there's a couple of fun things in here as it relates to the internal logic of the world. Like, for example, he mentions that he makes a phone call with voice only. This is, of course, reference to a history of video calling that you will eventually get into later in the book. Same thing happens with Don Gately's chapter here, where it mentions that they rob a house wearing like suspiciously well-made specific masks of a specific face, and those are obviously the masks that are also used eventually by people during the video phone calling era. So there's some stuff like that that's going on in Erdetti's chapter, but there is one particular quote on page 20 that I think is kind of the first salvo in this thematic push and pull that Wallace is going to do for the whole book, but this comparison between short-term gratification and long-term happiness, where it says, once the woman who said she'd come had come, he would shut the whole system down. It occurred to him that he would disappear into a hole in a girder inside him that supported something else inside him. He was unsure what the thing inside him was, and was unprepared to commit himself to the course of action that would be required to explore the question. So one of the things that you'll see come up a lot is that the people who engage in sort of the drug or the entertainment addiction are almost radically unwilling to ask probing questions of themselves, of why they are the way that they are, what is it that they're either avoiding or hiding from, what is motivating to make these decisions, that the decisions themselves that they're making are getting in the way of that self-exploratory process. And that the way to recovery is marked with a sort of self-interrogation. So that I would say is the first and a pretty important quote for the development of those themes in an otherwise stupendous chapter.
Yeah, and I think you could also circle that around to Kate Comfort too.
Yeah.
It's and really the whole theme of addiction, and what I really like about this book that is tackling this particular subject differently than other books that talk about addiction is that it's talking about not just the addiction to the substance, but the addiction to the process of consuming that substance, whether it's
Yes.
marijuana, television, whatever. I'm trying to think. There was my mind. Gately's
Gately's addiction to Demerol.
Demerol. Thank you. Yeah. So it's not so much about specifically the thing they are addicted to. With that scene that you were just talking about, his whole thing is his addiction to the process, his addiction to the quitting, the starting up again, having a specific color of bong, what he does, like preparing for his time that he's going to smoke himself stupid and then quit and then start the process again. With Kate Gompert, it's this process of almost identically doing the same thing where she was
Literally,
smoking a lot, going to work, getting super paranoid that she was going to get fired from work, sobering up, doing really good work, then getting too stressed out about that, going right back to where she started. And then with Gately, he's in this house robbing this house, and he sees a bottle of NyQuil, and that immediately just triggers him, and that's his focus right then and there in that moment is, hey, there's this narcotic that I could have, but, it's not the kind that has codeine in it, so it's useless to me. It is that cyclical nature of what it's like to be addicted to a substance or a thing, because I think a lot of people tend to forget that you can get addicted to more than just drugs.
Yeah. You can get addicted to playing tennis.
Yeah. And on that note, I have never cared for tennis. I had a friend growing up, my best friend played tennis constantly, and I respected it. I just never got into it. But reading about it in here is so fascinating.
Yeah.
I want to try to watch it again, but I know it's just not going to hit right. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, this book was really perfect for me because I was a tennis player. I still play a little bit now in the summer. Like I'm registered with the USTA for their sort of like regional events, and by regional I mean the stuff that anyone can sign up for, not even close to like professional.
Everyone welcome kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. The USTA is a governing body that controls basically any sort of like organized tennis play. So I already had that going for me. I also was a fan of bandanas to get real superficial before figuring out about David Foster Wallace. So I often look a bit like a stereotype in the worst way possible. But yeah, I would say that it wasn't even just in his fiction writing. He wrote about tennis in a nonfiction capacity that was also very thrilling. Like I would highly recommend anyone who wants to kind of explore that specific of Wallace's work, check out his collection String Theory, which is a compilation of just all of the essays he wrote on tennis across like all of his work. He was able to explain the game no matter the context in a way that it sort of extracts what is most exciting about it from how the sport just looks when you're spectating. But I agree that yeah, there is that sort of process of addiction that you can kind of get addicted to in and of itself. And it's also true in Hal. He makes a comment in his chapter about doing one-hitters beneath the inflatable lung, that the secrecy and the blowing it into the fan is part of it for him.
Yeah.
That's what he really sort of relishes in it. It isn't always just the chemical process. It is of getting the dopamine or the high. It is also the way by which you obtain that chemical process. That comes up a lot. The next sort of cycle of trauma that is talked about, or this kind of intergenerational sort of process that repeats itself, comes up in Oren's chapter, where we get some interesting details about sort of his relationship, but then also his relationship with his father. There's a quote here that says, "And so to the glass canyons and merciless light of Metro Phoenix in a kind of desiccated circle near the Tucson of his own father's desiccated youth." So you literally have a son following in the footsteps of his father in terms of where he's living. And then later on down the page, we have this, it's disconnected between two paragraphs, but it follows really well, where it says, "So now his own eye mucus is secure, in the desert southwest, but the bad dreams have gotten worse since the trade to this blasted area. Himself had fled long ago as an unhappy youngster. As a nod to Oren's own unhappy youth, all the dreams seem to open briefly with some sort of competitive tennis situation. So again, you have the same pattern of this unhappy childhood in the father being replicated in the son. And once the son enters into a place where the father had lived, his sort of own psychic afflictions are getting worse. So this is another way in which he's building up these themes. The next will come in the scene with Hal and Cadenza doing one-hitters, where a line on page 50 is Mrs. Averill in Cadenza isn't crazy about the idea of Hal drinking, mostly because of the way his father had drunk when alive, and reportedly his own father's own father before him in Arizona, California. So we once again now have a third generation of substance abuse or of sort of significant interaction with a substance. In this case, alcohol. Hal isn't, getting drunk all the time. It's in reference to the fact that he sneaks out to a bar that that once a week has blind bouncers. It's like a day of like charity to the Blind Bouncers Consortium or something like that.
Yeah.
So it may not be alcohol that he is addicted to, but this is being brought up in context of a chapter in which he is discussing the sort of particularities of his own drug use, right? So again, another instance of this major kind of process that he's talking about.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on that didn't really click with me on the first read through, is the way in which the Incandenza family relationship is set up, specifically with the boys. You have a father who, as evidenced, in this set of pages that we read, is so unable to communicate with his own son that he has to go to these extremely absurd lengths to do so. And these sons he has who are living in his shadow, who are in their minds really, and no one else's, but in their own minds are expected to live up to their father's legacy and to continue kind of building that name and mirroring his life in a way. And what I find really interesting, and like I said, it didn't click with me until I started up this second reading of it, is the lack of communication between James and Cadenza and his sons is the one thing that isn't carried over by them. They communicate with each other very well and very regularly.
Absolutely.
And those are some of my favorite sections of this book, especially the conversations between Hal and Oren. There's some great ones that come further into the book that really shine a light on them as characters and a lot of what's going on in the book. But yeah, that familial, that feeling of having to be the person that everyone thinks you have to be, even though no one thinks you really have to be like that, and the pressure and anxiety that causes is a huge part of what's going on here as well.
Absolutely true. Later in that same chapter, we get a sort of direct comparison of I guess I'm going to have to start calling these like the high and low path, in the sense of high being this long-term pursuit of satisfaction, and then this low path of this sort of cycle of instant gratification, where on page 53 we get a description of kind of this idea that you build up all of this stress as a high-achieving young person, and so what you maybe do is over the course of a weekend you just blow out all of your circuits with alcohol and drugs, and you keep doing that week after week after week, and you can kind of get away with it pretty well in into your late 20s, is what the book specifically says. But it literally says this circular routine in relation to this drug or substance use. So, like, again, I'm not being hyperbolic. Like, the chapter icons are circles. The book itself is looking at all these processes that repeat itself in a very key way. And then a little bit further down 53, we get a statement of one of the major themes of the book here, where it says, some persons can give themselves away to an ambitious pursuit and have that be all the giving themselves away to something they need to do. Though sometimes this changes as the players get older and the pursuit more stress-fraught. American experience seems to suggest that people are virtually unlimited in their need to give themselves away on various levels, and some prefer just to do it in secret. So, again, we have this direct comparison of the high and the low. There are some people who are going to just sort of give themselves over to one task, and that task is going to give them everything they need. Tennis or high achievement in anything being that in this book. And then the other is this feeling that you can give yourself to everything. You can consume everything. You can engage with everything. You can take everything in. And there is something distinctly American about that Wallace is saying. That in this day and age, with entertainment access being what it is, with the development in technology, with the myriad of substances you can consume, that it has become incredibly easy through the manipulation of capital and through the manipulation of sort of the free market to make people think that a part of your identity is this constant consumption and this constant giving away of pieces of yourself. Whereas a dedication of yourself to one or just a couple of things requires very, very real sacrifice of something else. And this is one of the ways in which the book, I think, and I'm sure you would agree, Cody, is incredibly prescient. The way in which he's talking about this idea of you have this unlimited capacity to give yourself, and that's a really distinctly American thing, really is part of the development of a theme related to how the further into the millennium we get, the easier and easier it is going to be, as Wallace would put it, for men who do not love us but want our money will put images on a screen in a dark room to convince us that they love us. And that there is a commerce built into that specifically. That by engaging in that, you're feeding back into the machine that is continuing to take something away from you. It's a major, major part of this book. Certainly as we get further into the stuff with the entertainment cartridge, especially.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say on page 54, about right in the middle, the lines ending the main paragraph there. Like most North Americans of his generation, Hal tends to know way less about why he feels certain ways about the objects and pursuits he's devoted to than he does about the objects and pursuits themselves. Yep. It's hard to say for sure whether this is even exceptionally bad, this tendency. That shit hits so hard in 2026.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just my fiance has this great line that she tells her dad anytime her dad sends her like some unhinged political stuff. Where she's like, anytime that I feel myself getting angry at something I see online, I suddenly start to think, what is someone trying to sell me?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is just one outgrowth of this exact idea that Wallace is talking about on that page. And then, of course, it transitions to a very small kind of flashback to the medical attaché, who is introduced earlier in the book as having put a video cartridge into his TV that he's become enthralled with. And at this point, he has both wet himself and not eaten his dinner, despite the very important role that his dinner plays in his evening, as Wallace describes when his character is introduced. And I actually did the math, and I've been running a tally of how long he's been sitting in the chair.
Oh, really?
Every time it flashes back to his perspective. And at that point, after the quote you read out, he's been sitting there for 5 hours and 3 minutes.
Jesus.
Just watching this film on a loop, which if you go to the filmography of himself, I think the final one they're guessing is like 45 minutes. So
I think so.
He's watched the movie like almost 6 times.
He could have just listened to one episode of Mapping the Zone.
This is true. There's also a line right at the bottom of the last paragraph before the page break on 55, just one page over, where it says, the reason being it's a lot easier to fix something if you can see it. That's basically an AA parable. Like,
Yeah.
that is essentially saying, the first step to like resolving your addiction is admitting you have one. And then from there we get into the introduction of Don Gately. And Don Gately, as you've mentioned a couple of different times, is a drug addict who robs houses in order to satisfy that drug addiction. And there's a lot of really good stuff in this chapter about why he does that, the thrill he gets out of it. The portion with the NyQuil is particularly good.
Well,
and there's
technically, he
one
burgles them until
Yes,
he robs one.
that's true.
I never understood that differentiation, but it is hugely important.
It is hugely important to his character, especially as the book goes on. Yeah, that he was committing burglaries until eventually they broke into a house to do that, and it turned out one of the people was still there, and he was suffering from a significant, like, cold with particularly sinus congestion, and Gately gagged him while they robbed him, and he died. And that has put him in a very significant sort of legal challenge, because he's broken into these houses in such a similar way that they've developed a pattern of who's responsible, which leads him to be arrested. And I didn't know this until I read the book either. There is a distinction between burglary and robbery. Burglary is just where you break into someone's house and no one's there and you take some stuff and you leave. Robbery is where there is some sort of threat of violence involved, or you're taking it from a person being sort of present in front of you.
Yeah.
And the man, whose name is Guillaume Duplessis, is a Canadian politician who lives and works in America in kind of an ambassadorial sense, but is actually an operative who kind of funnels cash and resources for violent terrorist networks and separatist groups from Quebec. He will come up again later in the scene with Maurice and Steeply. Our next big sort of moment is when we are introduced to Dr. James Incandenza, also known as Himself. Himself and the Moms are the respective sort of familial nicknames for the mother or father and mother of the Incandenza family. We also get an offhand reference that Hal has a nickname, which is not particularly nice, but I don't think we ever learn what it is.
I don't recall that we do.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, okay, I'm going to figure this out eventually, and I'm curious what it is, but I don't remember it ever actually coming up.
Yeah. James Incandenza is a fascinating character.
Yes.
He did a number of different things over the course of his life. He started the Enfield Tennis Academy. He started the Enfield Tennis Academy after inventing a type of energy generation called annular fusion. Now, annular fusion is not real, but it is...
It's a different world if it was.
Yeah, it is a way of basically reconciling fusion and fission power, is basically what it is. And it is a process by which toxic waste that is produced in the first step is then used as fuel for the next step. And in that way, you kind of have a sort of limitless energy solution, but one that produces a significant amount of toxic waste, which comes in as a very significant factor in the political tensions that exist in the novel. The other important thing to think about, again, in this sort of book length theme of cycles, processes that repeat themselves, is you have annular fusion literally being a circular process, but also I'm going to repeat the phrase. It's a process by which toxic waste produced in one step becomes fuel for the next. If you are to look at that in a cycle of abuse and familial trauma and addiction perspective, the sins of the father become fuel for the next process, whatever that may be. become fuel for the next step of the son becoming addicted, or they can become fuel for the son to outpace the father, to do something better, or to build a healthier sort of life for themselves afterward. So again, this stuff is laced into everything that this book is doing. So he invents that energy. He is also an avant-garde filmmaker. And
with a huge filmography.
A huge filmography, which is also where we get into our first major footnote. The notes and errata section of this book is interesting. It's another way that Wallace mentions in a lot of interviews contemporaneous to the book's release. It was another way of him for fracturing the text to continue to support this idea of the significant difficulty of being an adult with a consciousness in America. But a lot of it is stuff that we're not necessarily going to go over because it's not really germane, right? Like it is to a grander conversation like the one we're having. A vast majority of the endnotes are, scientific names for drugs or animals. They are, biographical data for real people or drugs. And then there are other footnotes in a significantly lesser capacity that are whole chapters of the book.
Fictional historical context is what would describe it well.
Yeah, or sort of side conversations between characters that happened prior to the book beginning, or reflections, or any number of things. Those are going to be the ones that we talk about. And this is where we're going to take a detour into himself's filmography, because this is footnote
25, I think.
24, 25. And it's like 7 pages of just his filmography. And a lot of it is not super important. A lot of it is just different kind of, some of them are industrial films, some of them are like art experiments, like the one where the film is an audience watching itself on film and them like slowly losing their mind. But there is some of it which is significantly important. So some of which is actually scenes from the book. Before I get into those, though, one of the things that crops up a couple of different times over the course of his filmography is this film Infinite Jest, that he tries to make either 5 or 6 times. Yeah. Several of them are unfinished. Several of them are partially released or not released at all. It is unclear whether he really ever completed to his own satisfaction, but it's something that was obviously bothering him enough that he kept trying to do it over and over and over again.
An obsession, almost.
An obsession, yeah. And this whole podcast series we're doing, it's all spoiler alert, so I don't feel bad saying this. That is the Lethal Entertainment. Yes. The Lethal Entertainment that is currently gripping the medical attaché, and that will function as a very important part of the book's political structure, is that film, Infinite Jest. And you do eventually get a description of what it is like from someone who sort of like, I think it's like the person who watched it did so through like a incredibly small slit in like a steel.
It's the Monty Python
wall
thing again.
Yeah.
Where somebody had to like watch it partially like from behind a tree. So that they didn't see all of it, and then someone had to watch the other like literal half of it on the screen, and then they just talked about what it was.
Yeah. We get a sort of prefiguring of the film as well in the footnote. So before he actually starts trying to make Infinite Jest, there's a footnote here that is called a film called Mobius Strips, which was released Year of the Whopper by Lactrodectus Mactans Productions, which is the scientific name for a black widow spider, which both Oren and himself are afraid of. Starring Hugh G. Rection, Pam Heath, Bunny Day Taffy Apple. It is 35 millimeter print. It's 109 minutes. It's black and white. It has sound. It's a pornography parody. Possible parodic homage to Foss's All That Jazz, which a theoretical physicist who can only achieve creative mathematical insight during coitus conceives of death as a lethally beautiful woman. This is an important description because it involves a woman that he will eventually meet in real life, and then also is somewhat of contextually what Infinite Jest, the sort of film in the book, is about. There's a couple of other really interesting things here that I want to spotlight. There's another film that is called Valuable Coupon has been removed, the description of which is a boy helps his alcoholic, delusional father and disassociated mother dismantle their bed to search for rodents, and later he intuits the future feasibility of a DT cycle, lithiumized annular fusion. That scene happens on page 491. There is a very long sequence in which himself as a child is helping his parents move a piece of furniture, a mattress specifically. And then he later in his life would invent annular fusion. So he's adapted a portion of his life there. We also get, just underneath that, baby pictures of famous dictators, which is summarized as children and adolescents play a nearly incomprehensible nuclear strategy game with tennis equipment against the real or holographic backdrop of sabotaged ATH-SCME 1900 atmospheric displacement towers exploding and toppling during the New England chemical emergency of the year of the Wonder Chicken. Celluloid unreleased. Page 321 is when that happens, when the teenagers play eschaton at the tennis academy. We also get at least 3 cheers for cause and effect, which is described as a way of diverting himself from his wife, Heath's poorly hidden affair with the academically renowned mathematical topologist who is acting as the project architect. This is obviously a reference to his wife, Avril, cheating on him with her brother-in-law. We get another reference to Avril's cheating within Dial C for Concupiscence, in which the character of that film falls in love with an armless Near Eastern medical attaché. We learn in the book that Avril has slept with like 27 medical attachés or some number like that. We get another reference to something we've actually already read at this point in the book, which is it was a great marvel that he was in the Father without knowing him, which is described as suffering from the delusion that his etymologically precocious son is pretending to be mute, poses as a professional conversationalist in order to draw the boy out. That, of course, happens on page 27. So we have an example of this man clearly taking elements from his own life and putting them into his work, and vice versa, because it would appear as though the film that he made, it was a great marvel that he was in the Father without knowing him, happened before the actual moment in time in which he did the same thing to his child. So he certainly is a man of like scattershot, I guess, genius, and really struggled with sort of the line between reality and unreality, fact and fiction, and struggled to communicate in a very similar way to his son Hal, as far as where Hal ends up at the end of the book. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now, because I think the rest of it gets into stuff that we need more context for.
Yeah.
We do also get another reference to the fact that his father was an alcoholic, that being himself's father, where it says, although a lot of it, the experimental and conceptual film work, was admittedly just plain pretentious and unengaging and bad, and probably not helped at all by the man's very gradual spiral into the crippling dipsomania of his late father. That's what comes before the footnote of 24. Dipsomania is like a term for alcoholism from like the 1910s.
Yeah, I had to look that one up.
It's an interesting one. Anything else you want to cover before we get to the next sort of big thematic conversation, which is Kate Gompert?
The only thing I would add regarding himself's filmography is a lot of it, is just these kind of like throwaway, goofy films that sound like Troy McClure movies. like The Knight Wears a Sombrero. And my personal favorite, which I do want to mention, good-looking men in small, clever rooms that utilize every centimeter of available space with mind-boggling efficiency. Unfinished due to hospitalization. But I think what it does is it does a good job of showing his obsessiveness at making these films and categorizing them, and the sort of ascent of his filmmaking skill. Like, they start as these sort of rudimentary exercises in just filming a rough concept or idea, and then they become more and more grandiose and more specific in what they're getting at. So you can kind of see his mindset as he goes through making these films and how he kind of shifts as a character and
Yeah.
grows within his own filmography in a weird way.
Grows within his own filmography, but also seems to grow into a degrading perception of what the world around him is.
Yes. Distorts his own reality.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite of the films, by the way, since you shared yours, is The American Century as Seen Through a Brick.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Year of the Whopper, Latrodectus Macton's Productions documentary cast with narration by P.A. Heaven, 35mm, 52 minutes, color with red filter, and oscillio photography, silent with narration. Summarized as the U.S. Boston's historical Back Bay streets are stripped of brick and repaved with polymerized cement, the resultant career of one stripped brick is followed from found art temporary installation to displacement by EWD catapult to a waste quarry in southern Quebec for its use in the FLQ-incited anti-Onan riots of January Whopper, all intercut with ambiguous shots of a human's thumb, alterations in the interface pattern of a plucked string. I don't know if that would be a good movie to watch, but man, would I love to see what that looks like.
Yep.
So that brings us, in my mind, to the Kate Gompert section, as far as kind of proceeding through here. And to kind of just give like a brief overview of it, she's been hospitalized for a suicide attempt. In which
third, I think, right?
I believe it's her third or fourth.
Yeah.
And in this particular instance, she swallowed like a god awful amount.
Every pill she had in the world, I think, is how she described it.
Yeah, it's something like 60 pills or something like that she takes in total. And a psychologist has come to speak with her. And what sort of follows through this chapter is, as both myself and yourself have mentioned, probably the greatest depiction that I have ever come across in fiction, or honestly nonfiction, of what it is like to experience depression, to be in a state of clinical depression, and the reasoning behind suicidal ideation. Both of these things are things that I have struggled with in my own life.
Likewise.
Both the clinical depression and the suicidal ideation. And this is a scene where it really kind of feels like someone scraped out the inside of my own head and put it on the page, as far as what the feeling and the thought process itself is like.
Yeah, 100%. It, like I said, there is a level of empathy that exists in the way that she is described. It never feels like she's written as a character who is looking for sympathy, is some kind of like a medical curiosity or anything like that. She's a human being who is going through a very difficult mental illness, and as so many people who experience depression understand, like it's incredibly hard sometimes to like elaborate or explain how it feels, because it can be so uniquely different and affecting. And there's I don't want to say comfort, but in reading her, or I guess it really Wallace's description of how she feels and her vocalization of how she feels, it is almost comforting, because that, up until I read this, like, that was always what I kind of felt and wanted to say, but never could really find the words for.
Yeah, it makes you feel less alone and had that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think if there's like a good one-shot quote to read out.
I've got a couple of shortish ones.
Yeah, if you want, go for it.
Yes. So on page 71, sarcasm and jokes are often the bottle in which clinical depressives sent out their most plangent screams for someone to care and help them. I mean, you think about how many comedians suffer and go through this, and that's kind of thing that you don't realize until they're gone, is that what they were dealing with. I wasn't trying to hurt myself. I was trying to kill myself. There's a difference. And then her explanation a little bit later. I didn't want to especially hurt myself or like punish. I don't hate myself. I just wanted out. I didn't want to play anymore. That's all. Play, nodding in confirmation, making small, quick notes. I wanted to just stop being conscious. I'm a whole different type. I wanted to stop feeling this way. If I could have just put myself in a really long coma, I would have done that. Or give myself shock, I would have done that instead. That's a really succinct way of putting it, like, that I just could never really think to express. Like, it's not always this, "Oh, I just want I just wanna die and be gone and, you know, the world can remember me," whatever. Sometimes it's just like, I don't know what else to do. I just need to push pause on this for a long time and sort of let my brain reset itself and see how things come out when I come back around.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people that can be so challenging, and that inability to do that is what gets so frustrating that it builds up to, you know, going beyond ideation.
Yeah. Yeah. I have been lucky enough to have kind of escaped episodes of clinical level depression for about 7 or 8 years now, which has been lovely. But specifically the way in which she describes the kind of thought that everything would be fine if someone could just put me into a coma for 6 months. Like that is like almost word for word what I have said to people during the period of my life where it was a pretty regular thing that I would have those episodes of depression show up. And specifically the way that on 72 she says, I didn't believe this feeling would ever go away. I still don't. I'd rather feel nothing than this is very much just a succinct articulation of where that state pushes you to in just like a very honest way.
Yeah.
Of just like, yeah, I'm not trying to hurt myself. I'm actually trying to get the hurt to stop. And that is a perspective that I think is hard for people who don't know what that feeling is like to kind of intuit. But I think when it's put this way, Wallace managed to do it in a way that is both empathetic to the experience of people who have gone through that, him being one of them, but is also like genuinely educational about what the actual sort of thought process involved there is.
Yeah. And and that's another thing I think a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot of, but people who either have not had someone in their life who is suffering from depression, or who have not themselves suffered from it, there's this sort of misconception that it is just this ever long downtime where you can't ever be happy and all that. When really the reality is it is a very cyclical sort of thing. And that's why it ties into this so well, is it goes in these waves of, you know, everything's fine. Like for me personally, it was like everything would be good for about 3-4 weeks, and then I'd have about 1 to 2 weeks of just really bad naders, and that's when it was hard, and then it would go back up, and then it goes back down, and then it goes back up. And you have to sort of, that's part of the process, was for me, was understanding that and knowing how even when things seemed like they were really low, it was going to go back up. And yeah, it was going to go back down again, but it's always going to go back up. And understanding that is a huge part of that just that, not recovery probably, but just the understanding of it and adapting to it.
Yeah, articulated best here in 74, what you're saying, where it says, and yet this nauseated feeling has come and gone for you in the past. It's passed eventually during prior depressions, Catherine, has it not? But when you're in the feeling, you forget. The feeling feels like it's always been there and will always be there, and you forget. It's like this whole filter drops down over the whole way you think about everything a couple weeks after. It's just That's exactly how it is. I also love the description she gives of making of the feeling itself being like you're nauseous, like you're about to throw up.
Mhm.
Like that's I think the closest you could probably come to explaining. It's just this like uneasiness that something bad is going to happen.
Yep.
And I can't do anything about it. And then from that quote that I had read out on 74, it goes into the fact that she uses drugs to keep that feeling at bay, which I have also done, as have a lot of people.
Yeah. And again, that's one of those. This is where I think this is a book that really a lot of people should read and stop being afraid of it, because it does such a good job of tearing down these preconceived ideas of what these kind of things are. There's such a stigma against drug use in this country, and a lot of it stems from, as we see with Kate Gompert, from depression and trying to find a way to get out of that, not to necessarily ride the highs so much as just to get out of the lows. And then someone like Gately, where it's a way of it becomes, the addiction becomes a way of feeding itself. And so you have, the crime that becomes associated with it, which is where a lot of that stigma comes from, is a result of the drug use itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this vicious cycle that goes back and forth. And I think that as a country, if we had a better understanding of that, we could do a lot to eradicate a lot of needless deaths and really get better about solving the addiction crisis. It's not something that's ever going to go away. Something that could be easily more acutely managed, I think, is probably the best way to put that.
Mm-hmm. We also get a quote on 77, which is, "So I can start living some kind of damn life instead of just sitting around in pajamas pretending I'm sick like a third grader and smoking and watching TP again." By this point in the book, 76 pages in, Wallace has connected the impulse of drug use and television watching together, which is purposeful in the sense that the same thing that drugs can do for somebody, entertainment, in this case television, can do for somebody. So the fact that he keeps mentioning these two things in conjunction with one another as you read, very purposeful. Anything that you want to bring up about Kate Gompert before we move on?
No, I there's a lot of complexity in her character, but it's also, that's going to become more apparent as the story moves on. And so I don't want to take away from that.
Yes. I want to ask you how you feel about Gerhard Schmidt.
I don't know. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to like place in my mind, and I've got the page up here, and I'm like, okay, what do I remember about Schmidt? And then the first thing I look at is him donning a leather helmet and goggles to ride his BMW motorcycle around the campus. But at the same time, like you mentioned earlier, like the conversation that he has with Mario while he's tooling around on his motorcycle is a phenomenal one. I don't know. He's a very interesting character, and he's one that I have to kind of get my bearings again with, because I remember in my original reading, I thought he was an interesting character, but I wasn't paying enough attention to him. So he's kind of becoming a focal point for me in this read through, to kind of see where he's kind of locks into place with everything else.
Yes. Schmidt is not just a fan of BMWs, he's a fan of pretty much everything German.
Yeah.
Is a German himself and might be a Nazi.
Yeah.
Question mark. I think that obviously all of that is part of the humor of the character. The fact that you have like a Nazi being this sort of physical ed teacher for this highly regimented society, and I think it's an example of how if you push into one level of kind of self-discipline, you just end up at fascism. Yeah. But I think the other part of it too is, this might seem like a strange connection to make, but Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte is an interesting book for multiple reasons. One of which is that she, in my opinion, was engaging in something with the composition of that book that would not really be picked up until the 60s and 70s with the postmodernist in any real stead. And what I mean by that is that if you have read it, it is very difficult to parse out what is true in that book because the book itself is structured in a way where at times there are 3 or 4 different frame narratives of secondhand accounts of things happening. And one of the only characters who seems to have first-hand knowledge of the illicit relationship between Kathy and Heathcliff is a character who is literally unintelligible. He is written in dialect, in a way that unless you are reading like a critical edition that gives a transliteration of what he's saying, or some modern editions give you a trans just kind of strip out the fact that it's opaque, that you don't know necessarily what he's saying because it's written as he speaks in that dialect, which is like this very thick Northern English accent.
It's like if Groundskeeper Willie was trying to relay information to you.
Yeah.
It's very obtuse.
And I think it's possible that Wallace is doing a similar thing where he wants the reader to really be paying attention to parse out what is good from what is bad, and what is advisable versus what is not advisable. And so he's putting really good life advice out the mouth of a Nazi. I don't think because you're supposed to become a Nazi or because you're supposed to see value in what the Nazi party is saying, but in the sense that it, for you to see through it to the truth that he's articulating, that has nothing to do with Nazism, what he's talking about, requires you to kind of focus your lens a little bit. I think he's trying to put a kind of a block in between the reader and what is being spoken about so that it doesn't appear as though it's just the writer reaching across the page sermonizing at the reader. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I hadn't considered that, and now that is going to color my reading as we go forward.
And I'll read out some quotes here from him that give me this impression, because despite the fact that this scene is only like 2 leaves, 6 pages, not even 5, there's a lot in here. And basically, Stitt and Mario have this relationship where, because of the fact that Mario is physically deformed, he has a head that's too big, he has like one hand that's sort of shrunken into a claw, he can't really walk very well, he's in a very bad physical state, Mario. Wallace basically articulates that because he's in that state, people feel very comfortable opening up to him. And as a result, it's kind of given Mario this earnestness about him that he then faces the world with as a disposition. And because of this kind of quality of him as a human being, Stitt feels very comfortable talking to him and kind of dropping the disciplinarian kind of headmaster act that he puts on around the school, for lack of a better term. And there's a couple of quotes here that I want to read. One is, Stitt was educated in pre-unification gymnasium under the rather Kanto-Hegelian idea that junior athletics was basically just training for citizenship. That junior athletics was about learning to sacrifice the hot, narrow imperatives of the self, the needs, the desires, the fears, the multiform cravings of the individual appetite, will to the larger imperatives of a team, okay, the state, and a set of delimiting rules, okay, the law. It sounds almost frighteningly simple-minded, though, not to Mario, across the redwood table, listening. By learning, in Palestra, the virtues that pay off directly in competitive games, the well-disciplined boy begins assembling the more abstract, gratification-delaying skills necessary for being a team player in a larger arena. The even more subtly diffracted moral chaos of full-service citizenship in a state. Except Stitt says, but who can imagine this training serving its purpose in an experialist and waste-exporting nation that's forgotten privation and hardship and the discipline which hardship teaches by requiring? A U.S. of modern A, where the state is not a team or a code, but a sort of sloppy intersection of desires and fears, where the only public consensus a boy must surrender to is the acknowledged primacy of straight line pursuing this flat and short-sighted idea of personal happiness. So he is articulating one of the theses of the book. Not necessarily that junior athletics is going to get you to this point.
Yeah.
But, which is something that was descended in him from this like tyrannical German upbringing. But rather that there is a very real virtue in this idea of sublimating yourself to greater pursuits, of giving up a little bit of yourself, this short-sighted idea of personal happiness, personal gratification, to something that is going to give you some kind of long-term satisfaction, and that's difficult and requires continual sacrifice and continual work to do.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, it's tennis. In real life, it could be writing this book. You know, if
Yeah.
what your choice is to try and become an author, right? And that there is, again, as we've already talked about before, something distinctly American in having this, as he puts it here, desires and fears, where you just have to give yourself over to whatever whim of your sort of desires or thought process or fears point you in the direction of. Be that drug use, be that watching Instagram reels for 16 hours a day, be that, you know, engaging in any of the kind of online ecosystem that has cropped up, that at the end of the day is all built off of selling your personal data, getting advertising money, and trying to capture your attention with watch time. That's all YouTube has become about now. That's all Facebook and all these different social media algorithms have come about. They basically learned sometime in the mid 2010s that you can only make so much money off of putting random ads on internet links and articles. And instead, if you could monetize the idea of how long someone keeps something open, then there's a theoretically infinite source of money to be made off the back of that.
Yeah.
And so that's a very modern, like hyper modern interpretation of what David Foster Wallace is articulating here, that he clearly saw developing in the late 90s and was rightfully afraid of the effects that it would have on the American populace.
Like I said earlier, this book hits a lot different in 2026 than it probably did in 1996. And that's a scary thing. Like, it genuinely is. But I think, if anything, I don't want to say it's because of this book, but I think it's partly because of books like this that I personally am taking steps towards getting away from being like chronically online. I've never really had too much of a problem with it, but I've gotten more and more to the point where I'm just frustrated by the whole experience, and it's not something that's truly bringing me happiness.
And shitification is very real.
The shitification is very real. So, my wife and I are trying to find different things that we can do to sort of disconnect from the algorithm, so to speak. So we're you know, rather than doom scrolling, you know, shorts on YouTube and shit, like, we're getting magazine subscriptions again, and we're trying to spend more time reading. Like, we don't even have a TV downstairs. We have one TV in the house, and it's all the way upstairs, and I don't really spend any time on it right now unless I'm watching Taskmaster. So it's a very refreshing thing to kind of be able to disconnect in that way. And it's really hard to do, especially nowadays, because so much of our lives is driven by these things that are constantly tracking us and trying to keep us addicted and onto them. But once we can get away from that, it's a really refreshing feeling.
Yeah. And it's to connect it to the real life individual. It's important that he uses the phrase citizenship here, because in his final interview he gave to a German television station, he talks about how citizenship used to be something that was taught in his school, that like he had a class that was entitled citizenship. And in that, they talked about the importance of, you know, learning about political candidates, being invested in local political elections, and that there was a very real responsibility to being the citizen of a nation. And then over the course of that chunk of the interview, he begins to expand that concept of citizenship out to sort of just being a responsible adult, of like in general. And that if you're someone who's willing to take a couple hours to read through the political party platforms of candidates running for office, that probably says something else about you.
Yeah.
And that what happened in the United States was they found that it didn't actually matter what the party platform pages said. It actually just sort of mattered who bought the most airtime on television. And then as a result, it became a war over money, and then only the most wealthy candidates or those who were capable of getting the most donations, often by selling themselves out to corporate interests, are able to get into power in the first place. And this sort of downgrade all goes back to a lack of the focus of importance on citizenship. So this was obviously something that Wallace was particularly concerned about, as he mentions in that interview. But this is not the only quote from this chapter. I have two more from the next page over. You seek to vanquish and transcend the limited self whose limits make the game possible in the first place. It is tragic and sad and chaotic and lovely. All life is the same as citizens of the human state. The animating limits are within, to be killed and mourned over and over again. This is another, I would say, way of stating one of the theses of the book. He also says, Stitt says, this game, the players are all at ETA to learn. This infinite system of decisions and angles and lines Mario's brothers worked so brutishly hard to master. Junior athletics is but one facet of the real gem. Life's endless war against the self that you cannot live without. So there you have Wallace through Stitt taking his sort of allegory to its full conclusion. Tennis, the game of tennis, the act of trying to master this game where any direction is possible, every decision has a billion counter decisions, and so on and so forth, is therefore just a part of this idea of what it is like to try and live life correctly, so to speak, and make decisions in that war against the self. So that's where he's really putting, this is the allegory. This is what tennis represents.
And if
right up to
confirmation of that point's so good that Stitt has to stop for a second and think about how good that point was.
Yep, true enough. After that, we are introduced to Tiny Ewell, who's another Ennet House resident. We then go back to the Near Eastern medical attaché, and it would appear as though he's about 20 hours in. I started to get foggy on the math because I'm terrible at math. But probably about 20 hours in at this point. I'm actually just going to read this because it's one of the funniest short sections.
Yeah.
By mid-afternoon on 2nd of April, year of the dependent adult undergarment, the Near Eastern medical attaché, his devout wife, the Saudi Prince Q's personal physician's personal assistant, who'd been sent over to see why the medical attaché hadn't appeared at the Back Bay Hilton in the AM, and then hadn't answered his beeper's page, the personal physician himself, who'd come to see why his personal assistant hadn't come back, 2 embassy security guards with sidearms who'd been dispatched by a Canaanitic, heartily pissed off Prince Q, and 2 neatly groomed Seventh-day Adventist pamphleteers who'd seen human heads through the living room window and found the front door unlocked and come in with all good spiritual intentions. All were watching the recursive loop the medical attaché had rigged on the TV's viewer the night before, sitting and standing there very still and attentive, looking not one bit distressed or in any way displeased, even though the room smelled very bad indeed. This like running gag over the whole medical attaché part in the beginning of the book, where more people keep entering the house to like see what's wrong, catching a glimpse of the film, and then just joining the chorus. Like, I think if I'm not mistaken, when that plot line reaches its conclusion, like 20 cops also got sucked in to the same thing before they finally figured out that they needed to just cut the power to the house before anyone else goes inside.
And then by that point too, the attaché was in rigor mortis so bad that he was still sitting when they picked him up. Took him out.
And they carried a corpse out that was just still in sort of chair pose. It's amazing, yeah. After that particular section, this is where we get into Steeply and Morath. And Steeply and Morath are 2 sides of the political spectrum of the book. And both of them, well, Morath, but then also the head of the department, Rod the God Tyne, both of them could be triple agents. They could also be quadruple agents.
I love super super duper secret agency
Yeah.
thing. It's so good.
I love that there is a joke at one point where like Marath has completely lost perspective on what side he's supposed to be on based on the number of back and forth deals that he's made.
Is it an odd number or an even number?
But Steeply represents this creation of Wallace in the Onanite government, which all of that we'll get into when it becomes more relevant, called the Department of Unspecified Services, which is just a great name for a fictional government department. And he is meeting with someone that he has turned from the AFR, which is a Quebecois separatist organization that seeks to wage war on the greater interconnected nation of Central and North America, and in particular the President of America who forced these countries together. How they did so, we'll get into at a later time. And it's essentially an information exchange over whether or not the AFR was responsible for the situation with the medical attaché. That's what they're talking about. This idea that both sides, the Department of Unspecified Services and the AFR, are aware that this lethally entertaining film exists. And they are attempting to figure out whether the AFR was responsible for kind of testing it on somebody by mailing it to the medical attaché and seeing if it would have the effect that they expected. How that plot will blow up into a larger thing, we'll get to it eventually. But that's what this conversation is about. Not too much in there from a perspective of the actual like themes of the book that Wallace is working towards. This is more plot building.
Yeah.
That he does than anything else.
It's a fun read, but it becomes way more important further down the novel. Absolutely.
We do get another major footnote out of this section, which this is where, like, I remember I had a conversation with someone when I was first reading Wallace, where I was like, part of the fun of reading him is I have no clue what it is that I'm going to get on any given page.
Yeah.
Because when you're going through the introduction to Marath, who is the member of the AFR. Oh, Steeply's cross-dressing, by the way.
Yeah,
he's been given a horrible. he's been given a horrible, like feminine disguise by the Department of Unspecified Services. One that is so bad that Marath wonders if there isn't some sort of like sexual fetish in the humiliation ritual of wearing it. That's at play there. That is also, as far as I remember, never explained. We don't ever know why they put him in a feminine outfit or disguise, what it's for, what he's doing. Like it's just.
Boy, does he dive into it. He is.
Yeah, and it's a source of a lot of hilarity over the course of the book. But the idea that like you don't know what Wallace is going to do. Footnote, I think it's 40 or maybe 39 is 39 is where they give you the definition of what the AFR is, but then I guess I'll just read the footnote. Marath's superior in the AFR, the Les Assassins des Fauteuils Roulants, aka wheelchair assassins, pretty much Quebec's most dreaded and rapacious anti-Onan terrorist cell. The leader of the Wheelchair Assassins USA cell, and the former boyhood friend of Remy Marath's later older brothers, both struck and killed by trains. B. Subnote B. See note 304. So you go to footnote 304, and it is a scene in which a child at ETA is plagiarizing a website for a paper he has to write. And what he is plagiarizing is a scholarly research article on the history of a game played in mining towns of Quebec where the children of asbestos miners would gather in specifically groups of 216 in order to play a game of chicken with a train in which groups of 6 of them would wait, and then whoever jumped across last was sort of the winner of that group. And then you continue the competition in like an ever dwindling bracket. And this is a game that you would think, yeah, that's pretty dumb. It probably is really dangerous. Yup. People died all the time. And a lot of people who would later become directors of the game just lost their legs. And then the people who lost their legs eventually at some point decided to form a terrorist organization.
Why not?
And that is what Marath is sort of a representative of. It's a great footnote. I love that footnote.
It is. That's another 7-page footnote.
Yeah. And the way in which Wallace continues to like comment both on the story that you're reading from this like fake journal, but then also how it's being plagiarized by the student is a very fun interplay, because the student is constantly commenting on how absurd the writing in the article is in the same way that like the reader is.
Yeah.
It's great. Anything you want to mention about the AFR before we start to wrap up?
I do just want to point out, just to loop back to the shoddiness of Steeply's outfit. This was another scene that made me almost like cry laughing. Is when Marath tells him, "And your tits, they have become cockeyed. I will tell you, services without specificity, they have given you ridiculous tits, and now they point differently." Just imagining this French, Quebecois man pointing this out with all sincerity.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's great. It's so good. The fact that he so like, apologies if I'm mispronouncing the French words. I am learning French in what will eventually probably be a pursuit in vain of reading the last volume of Proust in French.
Oh yeah, okay.
But so I'm like almost 2 years into the process of learning French. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. The way that he talks is very much how I would say someone who is a native French speaker would speak if the sentence structure of French were to be transliterated into English.
Okay.
Which is not a joke that I necessarily picked up on the first time, in the sense that like I could tell that Wallace was trying to write sort of a person with a low familiarity of English speaking. But as someone who knows, a very small quantity of French, it's even funnier just because I can see the way in which it would map somewhat cleanly to someone speaking in French.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so there's a lot of humor in that linguistically as well. Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful scene. We also get a reference back to the fact that one of their kind of handlers or organizers was killed in a robbery. This is the person from earlier in these pages that we already mentioned, having been killed accidentally by Gately. And then lastly, we get into the scene of them recovering in the locker room together. I don't really have anything else to add on that beyond what we already mentioned.
Yeah,
it's just a good back and forth by a lot of teenagers.
And I will admit I did fall into the having to look up if it's really okay to use what was it? Not Pine Sol. The
Lemon Pledge.
Lemon Pledge
as a sunscreen.
It's not. Please don't do that. And just the visceral image I got of them peeling dried and desiccated. It's like when you're a kid, and you put the Elmer's glue on the back of your hand and peel it off, but like 100 times more disgusting than that, because it's all crackly and dry. Oh god.
I think there's a joke, if I'm not mistaken, at some point in the book where someone like tries to manage to peel like a perfect husk off of themselves.
Yeah.
So it's like still standing,
which
like when he comes out of it,
became a reality. If anyone watches anything on Dropout, which it's it's like the only streaming service I still use. They had a game that they did where these contestants were kind of like taking stupid bets and seeing like who'd be willing to do stupid things. One person literally covered their body in Elmer's glue and then tried to peel off a human-shaped husk, I guess is the best word.
Yeah, it's truly crazy stuff. The lemon pledge and the Visine bottle economy of urine.
Yeah.
Are two of my favorite kind of random things about what goes on at Enfield Tennis Academy. So that kind of brings us to our wrap-up segment, which is quotes or sort of funny moments that we wanted to go over. Did you have anything in particular burning a hole in your literary pocket?
I think the only other thing I wanted to point out that we didn't really cover is, and this will come up again repeatedly, is Mario Incandescence's wholesomeness. And he's kind of like, you mentioned his earnest, he's being like one of the only, if not the only, earnest character in the whole book, and how that earnestness allows people to open up to him, especially someone like Stitt. But it's also the fact that he's so just like wholesomely aloof. Like when him and Stitt are riding around and Stitt says, a made up story for some children. An efficiency of Euclid only flat. For flat children. Straight ahead. Plow ahead. Go. This is myth. There aren't any flat children, really. That, and then not too long after that, he actually just says Willikers, which fucking killed me.
Instead of G. Willikers.
It's little things like that of what get me from time to time in that one. That, and then also, I'm just seeing this on the same page, the original founding motto of the school that James Incandescence had done, te oxidere possunt sed te edre non possunt nefas est, which basically means they can kill you, but the legalities of eating you are a little bit dicier. Which had to be changed for obvious reasons.
But wasn't until he died.
Until he died, yeah. It's such a... Oh my god.
Oh, man.
I need a shirt that just says that.
They can kill you, but the legalities of eating your body
are a bit dicier.
We should have Luke create a design for the spread that just says that on it. Oh man. Yeah, that part was absolutely excellent. One of the funniest moments. I also really loved, this comes from himself's filmography. And it's like such a stupid joke, but it's one that gets me every time I read it, where it says found drama 1, found drama 2, found drama 3, conceptually unfilmable, unreleased. It's just like it's barely a joke, but it's one that makes me laugh every time I read it.
Oh.
I also another one of my favorite funny moments is how fucking neurotic Oren is about the cockroach situation in his apartment.
Oh yeah.
Everything with Oren is so crazy. Like he requests a trade from one of his NFL teams because they see like a body sliding out of like a graveyard during a mudslide event in New Orleans, and then later in a scene in this section of pages, it would appear as though him and the rest of the Arizona Cardinals football team are actually parachuting into a stadium
in bird
dressed as Cardinals. And no matter how many times he has the Terminex people out, there are still the enormous roaches that come out of the bathroom drains. Sewer roaches, according to Terminex. Botaria implacabilis or something. Really huge roaches. Armored vehicle type bugs. Totally black with Kevlar type cases, the works. And fearless. Raised in the Hobbesian sewers down there. Boston and New Orleans little brown roaches were bad enough, but you could at least come in and turn on a light and they'd run for their lives. These Southwest sewer roaches, you turn on the light and they just look up at you from the tile like, you got a problem? Oren stomped on one of them, only once. That had come hellishly up out of the drain in the shower when he was in there, showering, going out naked and putting shoes on and coming in, and trying to conventionally squash it. And the result was explosive. There's still material from that one time in the tile grouting. It seems unremovable. Roach innards, sickening. Throwing the shoes away was preferable to looking at the sole to clean it. Now he keeps big glass tumblers in the bathroom. And when he turns on the light and sees a roach, he puts a glass down over it, trapping it. After a couple days, the glass is all steamed up, and the roach has asphyxiated mercilessly, and Orin discards both the roach and the tumbler in separate sealed Ziplocs in the dumpster complex by the golf course up the street. The yellow tile floor of the bathroom is sometimes a little obstacle course of glasses with huge roaches dying inside, stoically just sitting there. The glass is gradually steaming up with the roach dioxide. The whole thing makes Orin sick. Now he figures the hotter the shower's water, the less chance any small armored vehicle is going to feel like coming out of the drain while he's in there. And then there's a callback to that joke when he's describing one of the women that he's been seeing recently, where she goes to the bathroom at night after they have sex, and when she comes back, she wonders what's up with all the cups on his floor. Oh, definitely one of my other favorite sort of funny moments of these pages.
I have one more.
Okay.
This is on 67 and 68, where he, I want to say this is Hal, has this dream about playing tennis, and he's just standing there, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a long paragraph, but the very, very end of 67, high overhead, near what might be a net post, the umpire, blue blazered, wired for amplification, and his tall high chair whispers play. The crowd is a tableau, motionless and attentive. I twirl my stick in my hand and bounce a fresh yellow ball and try to figure out where in all that mess of lines I'm supposed to direct service. I can make out the stands, in the stand stage left, the white sun umbrella of Mom's. Her height raises the white umbrella above her neighbors. She sits in her small circle of shadow, hair white, legs crossed, and a delicate fist upraised and tight and total unconditional support. The umpire whispers, "Please play." That umpire just having that moment of crisis of like, please, come on. I have one thing to do.
Please.
Please play.
Please play. It's a real Jeb Bush please clap moment.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so any quotes that you have, or is there like a particular quote that stuck out to you from this chunk?
It's on 73. This is to go back to the Kate Gompert
sure.
scene and her description of depression. About in the middle of the page, she says, "It's like horror more than sadness. It's more like horror. It's like something horrible is about to happen. The most horrible thing you can imagine. No, worse than you can imagine, because there's the feeling that there's something you have to do right away to stop it, but you don't know what it is you have to do. And then it's happening too, the whole horrible time. It's about to happen. And also it's happening all at the same time." The use of punctuation in that sentence, or the lack thereof, because there's no periods after "it's more like horror" until the end of that paragraph. It's all just it's commas and an em dash, and it gives that kind of feeling again of that anxiety, of that just even trying to explain it is an exercise in trying to stay calm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one. Oh, I also love, just to briefly go back to the funny moments, Ken Erdetti has what is described as one of the smaller pieces by this feminist artist. And yet it is described as taking up most of the wall space above his headboard. But I would say that my favorite quote comes from the Ken Erdetti chapter. Yeah, it's really hard picking one of them because there's a lot of pieces that are just particularly excellent. But the way that it ends, you kind of briefly mentioned it earlier in the show, and I agree, it's really excellent. It says, he thought very broadly of desires and ideas being watched but not acted upon. He thought of impulses being starved of expression and drying out and floating dryly away, and felt on some level that this had something to do with him and his circumstances, and what, if this grueling final debauch he'd committed himself to didn't somehow resolve the problem, would surely have to be called his problem. But he could not even begin to try to see how the image of desiccated impulses floating dryly related to either him or the insect which had retreated back into its hole in the angled girder. Because at this precise time his telephone and his intercom to the front door's buzzer both sounded at the same time. Both loud and tortured and so abrupt they sounded yanked through a very small hole into the great balloon of colored silence he sat in, waiting. And he moved first towards the telephone console, then over to his intercom module, then convulsively back towards the sounding phone, and then tried somehow to move toward both at once. Finally, so that he stood splay-legged, arms wildly out as if something's been flung, splayed, entombed between the two sounds without a thought in his head. That one really, strikes me as so good because it not only encapsulates the mentality that, Erdedi has at that scene in the book that's being pulled in two opposite directions, but it also is thematically appropriate to the fact that this is the introduction to a lot of these Ennin House characters. And the way in which we're introduced to most of these Ennin House characters is the final moment before they go to jail and eventually recovery, just go to recovery, are in some sort of recovery that is going to transfer to an outpatient program. We're being very purposely introduced to them at these moments of decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Erdedi is being introduced at this moment in which he's talking about, this is the last time, I'm not going to do this again, this is the last time, I'm going to do 200 bong hits a day, which is insane, in an effort to make this so bad that I'm never going to want to do it again. And then he is literally being pulled into multiple directions at the end of that chapter, where he has to make a decision between recovery, moving past the instant gratification and to the long-term satisfaction, or staying stuck where he's at in these loops. And that particular sort of line of, he thought very broadly of desires and ideas being watched but not acted upon. He thought of impulses being starved of expression and drying out and floating dryly away, and felt on some level that this had something to do with him and his circumstances. And then, as he says, his problem is another beautiful evocation of the addictive mindset in a similar way to the Kate Gomper chapter, but one that I think also enforces what the book is doing in a really interesting way.
Mm-hmm. That's a great pull.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our first episode of this program. We will be back on the first of every month to continue on through the book. In this case, we are going to be reading pages 105 through to 198, stopping at the page break on 198. And the final line that you will want to read is, Enfield Tennis Academy still has to pay full rent every month on what it almost buried. So that's where you have a month to read before we come back and we continue to cover the book in the way that we sort of just did. If you have any feedback, if you have any questions for us in regards to the Infinite Jest conversation, if you have any thoughts that you want to share, you can certainly still get in contact with us in any way that you normally would with the Mapping the Zone, kind of the main show. Anything related to Infinite Jest, though, we will save for conversation within these episodes. So if someone emails us, we just read it on the next Mapping the Zone episode. But in this case, since this is a separate program about a separate author and a separate book, anything you send us, we'll address in the next Infinite Jest episode. So our turnaround time on emails and stuff like that is going to be longer because this is a one episode a month kind of a deal.
Yeah.
You can get in touch with us most easily on Blue Sky at Mapping the Zone Pod at our email address, mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are also accessible on Twitter at PinchOnPod, and we do have an Instagram. We're just Mapping the Zone Pod over there. If you are interested in donating to the show, if you think that what we're doing is worth $1, we would love to have that $1. You can donate to us on our Ko-Fi project. We are on Ko-Fi at Mapping the Zone. Or if you want to support us in a material way, like I said, maybe we'll get those T-shirts made up with Enfield Tennis Academy.
I'm gonna make it happen.
Slogan. You can visit our spread shop where you can get shirts, not hats. I always say hats. We don't have hats. You can get shirts, and you can get mugs and bags, tote bags. You can get anything you could possibly desire, as long as it's a normal sort of clothing product that's easily printable.
I would
no
also,
yeah.
No, what?
I was gonna say no bed sheets. We don't do those.
Oh
but...
man, we got to corner the market on that. No podcast is doing that. I was going to mention that we should, at this point, by the time this episode comes out, we should have the Apple subscriptions thing set up. So in an ideal world, if you want to subscribe to the show, that will give you ad-free episodes. And these episodes, I don't know if I'm going to do the same with the main episodes, but for sure the Infinite Jest episodes will be available to subscribers a week early. So if that's something that interests you and you want to support us in that way, that'd be awesome. So that is an option that's out there too now.
All right. Until next month, enjoy wearing your bandanas.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.